Hello and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this beautiful afternoon, wherever it is that you may be. Welcome to another episode of My EdTech Life. And you're probably thinking, like, wait a minute, like, isn't he just on Wednesday evenings or on Saturdays? Well, I am officially on winter break, so I'm just excited that like I mentioned before, when the stars align and you have some wonderful guests, you will find the time to make sure that we get them on. And of course, yesterday we had a great guest here with Dr. Luke Hobson. And today we have an amazing guest that we're going to be able to talk about, the future of learning through augmented reality. We have founder, we have CEO, we have the main man from VictoryXR here, Steve Grubbs, who is joining us this beautiful morning. He's joining us from his home. And, I'm just really excited to have you on our show today. Steve, how are you doing this afternoon, I should say?
Yeah, well, I'm doing great, Fonz. I appreciate you being on the show, and this is one of those shows that seems to have an outsized influence on the XR industry. So we're glad to be able to talk with you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm really excited. Like I mentioned to you before, I am a longtime follower, Victory XR. I still have like my little cards that I got, with the torso, and I've got all of that. So I've been able to see how you have grown as a company and what you're doing now. And we're going to get into that, in a little later segment. But first, Steve, if you don't mind, for some of our audience members that are watching or listening for the first time, that may not be familiar with your body of work and what you do, if you can give us a brief introduction, your context in education, or in this case, your context in AR, VR, and if you can add one interesting thing about yourself that people may not know.
Well, hopefully there's more than one. So let's go. I went to elementary school at H.M. Perry in Iowa, and that's relevant and interesting because 30 years later we would purchase that school, and today we are building the digital school of the future from my brick and mortar school of the past. And people always ask me, well, what room did you choose for your office? And I walked in the first time after we purchased it, and there were a lot of cool options. But I ended up choosing the teacher's lounge because I just like having my own little private bathroom. So that was fun. And we kept the gym. We put in a sport court, raised the hoops from 9 to 10 foot, and we still play basketball in there. I'll be playing tomorrow night against a lot of guys. So that's one interesting fact. My father was a school teacher, taught social studies and government. And ultimately, as a very young man at age 24, I ran for the Iowa legislature. I was elected and ultimately became chairman of the House Education Committee. And from there, I wrote the first technology funding bill. And we let school districts use these dollars for whatever they wanted, but it had to be technology related. Some were just hooking up to the internet, others were buying computers, but this was in the mid 1990s. And one of the things that I learned being in government is that, and this is something I think we all know, the wheels of government move a bit slower than the wheels of entrepreneurship. And so even though we had some successful initiatives, I decided that if I wanted to really make an impact and make some very significant changes in the world, it probably was not going to come from working in government or the world of politics, that we might have a better shot at making some significant changes from entrepreneurship. And so that's what I've been pursuing ever since.
Man, that is so wonderful. And it's such a great story and inspiring. And we definitely, designing the school of the future, that is something that is wonderful. And I'm excited to hear about that work. As like I said, I follow you and the amazing work that you're doing. So now you said you do come, I guess your father was an educator. How about yourself? Did you pursue it? Was that something that maybe you said, yeah, this is what I want to do? Or really what was your passion? What was your why kind of growing up and then leading up
Yeah.
to being the founder of Victory XR?
Yeah. So it's interesting because education was a passion of mine. But hello, Dr. Morris. Education was a passion of mine. But at the same time, and this is perhaps a commentary on what we pay educators, I said to myself, I don't want to struggle financially like our family struggled. And so I knew I wanted to be in education, but I also knew that I wanted to make a little more money than my dad did. So I got a finance degree and a law degree from the University of Iowa, but I taught business law at St. Ambrose University, which is a regional university. And I always enjoyed teaching. And then I coached the high school debate team for 10 years, even though I was not a school teacher. And so I have always loved teaching. I have used podcasts and writing my Medium column to try to educate. And but at the same time, I do make a little more money than my dad did.
There you go. But you see, that's so wonderful though. But the passion is there, and I see it because again, I continually see your body of work on LinkedIn. I see the way that you share, posting on Medium and blogging and so on. So definitely education runs deep there. But I love the passion that you have for really seeing what is coming and where the future of not only work is going, but education and the work that you're doing in the higher ed space right now. And hopefully, bridging that gap between K-12 into education with augmented and virtual reality. So we're going to get to talk into that. But before that, I'd like to give Dr. Messina Morris a shout out. Thank you so much for joining us in the comments as she and her fabulous team, or the fabulous team at Morehouse College, I've been able to connect with them, and they've been on the show, and the amazing work that they're doing through VictoryXR. So we're going to talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Steve, excuse me, let me go ahead and just ask, okay, so you're writing, you have that passion for education, you want to just really, obviously, like you said, let's do a little bit better, take it up that extra notch. How did you first get introduced or have that vision for, hey, this is what I want to do with augmented reality? I'm seeing something here, maybe a trend. How did you just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go with this. I'm going to roll with this. What were some of the things that you were seeing?
So, being a technology guy, and I've got other technology companies, everybody sort of followed VR for a lot of years. And, but it really wasn't commercially available unless you were a real geek and doing, really insider things. Second Life was a 2D glimpse of what a spatial world could look like. And that was pretty cool, but it really had its limits. So when the New York Times put out the free Google Glass and shot some 360 VR, I downloaded a couple of those and I saw it and I thought, wow, this is really cool. And I also thought, how could this best be deployed? And what's the best use for this? And to me, education was the clearest path. Now, financially, gaming probably would have been smarter, but that's not my passion. And so we began in 2016 pursuing gaming, first with VR and then later with AR. And they're very connected. Once you create the base 3D objects, the spatial learning curriculum, then it just becomes a matter of how you're going to deploy it. And you can deploy it to different, AR or VR, you can deploy it to 2D WebGL, you can deploy it on different headsets, you can deploy it on different platforms, but it all starts with that base piece of learning that comes from a 3D object, a 3D experience, and goes out from there.
Excellent. So I really love what you said there, because sometimes, and I think for myself, because I didn't go to, traditional college of education. Actually, I never wanted to be a teacher. And many of you that have heard the podcast, you're probably tired of this story, but I always say this, like same way I wanted to be financially set. And I said, yeah, I want to make a lot of money, went through the school of business, but then I came into education and I absolutely fell in love with it. And what I'm seeing though sometimes is, and I love watching, as many companies that are out there that are doing such great things with their products. And sometimes I think, I know that they have their target market, but education is a huge market, and I can think of so many use cases for a lot of, things that are used in industry that can be easily transferable into the K-12 space. But, again, I'm not that far into that business world, but I think this is something like AR, VR is something that makes sense. And, you referred back to Second Life, and Second Life was a project that we actually had for one of my grad courses here as I was doing my master's in educational technology. And we had to create a room in Second Life and go through all of that, which was kind of great, but it has its limitations. But now we're seeing with the technology that we have now, it's a little bit more accessible. There's a lot of grants that are out there, and there's companies such as yourself that are doing some amazing work creating learning experiences for the Oculus Quest 2, as students will be using it amongst other platforms. So I really like what you said. You have a lot of things that are out there that are limited access maybe to those maybe in the business world, but now what I'm seeing is just that connection. And that's what I'm passionate about, that I'm seeing this trend, as we were talking earlier, where technology right now has kind of slowed down in the K-12 space. Not that there aren't a lot of companies that are out there, but I think it's just that kind of teacher burnout, that it's like, I just want to go back to, paper and pencil and so on, which is okay. We can find a blend. We can, and still integrate the technology. But what I'm seeing is the higher ed space, like Dr. Morris and the team at Morehouse, has really stepped up their game along with other higher ed institutions. So let's talk a little bit about this first. We'll go into your work with higher ed, and can you maybe tell us a little bit on how you connected with Dr. Morris and, Morehouse College? I'd love to hear that story and how Morehouse in the metaverse happened.
Sure. So we initially did work with their high school program. In the summer, they bring in first generation kids that are from high school, trying to make sure that they transition to college in a great way. So we worked with that, and then a visionary, a mutual friend of Dr. Morris and myself, Deshunte Carmen, he invited us in to talk about it. We gave him a demo. He said, "This is what we need." He recruited 4 great professors: Dr. Morris, Dr. Vereen, Dr. Clark, and Dr. Hamilton, and they all embraced it. They gathered on their own to move it forward. And literally, it was this amazing thing. As you may know, HBCUs were harder hit by the pandemic than a lot of other schools. And so while some schools went back and did, partially on campus, partially off, HBCUs for the most part stayed completely off campus. And so Morehouse looked for a way to improve that remote learning. And literally within 6 weeks, we went from nothing to delivering full spatial classes in virtual reality, which is more, I think that we've got a system that allows universities to transition quickly, but nobody will do it that fast. That, what Morehouse did is really something. And I saw an article a week or 2 ago that Stanford is now teaching their first class in full VR and on the metaverse, and that's great. But Morehouse College is well beyond Stanford, and the nation, the world looks to Stanford to lead in technology. But in this case, in metaverse education, it's Morehouse College, hands down. And the fact that Dr. Morehouse is leading that effort, and they call it Morehouse in the metaverse, I think that is very impressive, because, women in STEM are not as common, and especially in advanced coding, and something we're all working on. But But Dr. Morris serves as that example of she teaches chemistry. She leads in this transition to the metaverse. And so I think that's a great thing. So, when people look for a speaker, she's usually the first one I recommend. So that's where we're at. And as you may know, we recently signed a deal with Meta, formerly Facebook, to build 10 universities in the metaverse. And these aren't being built on Meta's Horizon platform, which lets colleges understand that look, this isn't Meta dictating to people what things have to look like. They just want to show that the metaverse is a real thing and that schools, colleges, universities can succeed there. And so that's why they are priming the pump on this project, giving away free VR headsets to schools that are signed up in the program. So we have about half of our schools signed up. So if there's a university or college that's interested, just feel free to email me at steve@VictoryXR.com. And the colleges and universities have to have some skin in the game. But for the most part, what it requires is that they're willing to have 2 classes at least that are taught on their metaversity. And that's at least 1 class a week, a lab that might be taught there. And then we ship off the headsets, we build the digital twin of the campus and take it from there. But and then Dr. Morris also is a consultant on the project, helping colleges and universities understand how they transition those classes to this digital world.
Oh man, that is so wonderful. And that is such great news because like you mentioned, I'm really excited obviously for the success that you are having at VictoryXR, but just, hearing also the story of Morehouse College in the metaverse with that team. What really surprised me, what really blew me away is like I was mentioning to you prior, I was telling I told them, I was like, it's amazing how higher ed for the longest time, in my 16 years of education, I've always been, man, like higher ed really needs to catch up. It's just lectures and doing this and, in the traditional method, the traditional way. And then all of a sudden I see Morehouse in the metaverse. I was like, hey, I want to learn more about this. And then just to see the way they incorporate this into their classes, but not simply working in silos, saying, oh, well, I'm only the College of Health. Oh, no, this is only for humanities. Oh, no, this is for history. But the way that they use this in a cross-curricular fashion to make sure you tie in, even with science, you're tying in humanities and you're tying in all of these subjects. And now they're coming together where before it was like, oh, no, like I'm College of Humanities. I don't need anything from that side. And I think that that's something that's very impressive. But not only that, just the reflection that they had themselves, talking about Dr. Tanya Clark. If you don't mind, Steve, I'm going to bring up a clip that was very powerful and resonated with me when I interviewed them. And this is something to me that really sets an example of what we need to see more in higher ed. So I'm going to go ahead and cue up this clip here.
Yeah, great.
Some advice that you would give K through 12 teachers to help build their students up and get ready for something like this in their future.
We've been talking a lot about content and its impact on the students, but it also impacts us as professors. I went back and I looked at my syllabi for this semester and just the things that I was doing pre-pandemic, they just weren't good enough anymore for the moment that we were in. I transformed my assessment. So that's the other thing. So my pedagogy is changing. The way that I assess the students is changing. They're building things rather than just writing on a flat surface, if you will. So my advice would be to re-examine with a really self-critical eye and with the purpose of improving, because we're all lifetime learners, right? We should always be constantly evolving our syllabi, our approaches, our texts. Don't let yourself get comfortable in that little niche. It's really easy to keep that same material. And don't be afraid of the advances that are happening in education. Stay with them so that you can stay relevant.
I thought that that was very powerful when I interviewed them. And just to hear that from this team, it really, I was so excited, and I am currently excited. As you know, I even sent you a presentation that I did for one of my doctoral courses on trends and trends analysis. And of course, I've always been a K-12 AR/VR guy. So I kind of just stepped out of my comfort zone, and now it's like I want to do some more research on the higher education. And then that's when I've been able to connect more with you and Dr. Morris and her team. But just hearing that professors are now seeing, like, hey, let's see what is relevant now, let's look at the tech, let's look at things differently, let's step outside our comfort zones and help our students learn by creating. That is very powerful. So let's talk a little bit about this, Steve, the creation process. VictoryXR, what is it that you offer colleges, or what you will offer these meta universities, as far as the creation components? Let's talk a little bit about that, so that way our audience can know more about the current work that you're doing.
Yeah, so the most important thing when you're teaching in a spatial environment are the 3D objects and what you can do with them. So think about the disservice done to students who learn kinesthetically. If you're sitting in a traditional classroom, there's not a lot of kinesthetic learning, or in other words, learning by doing. But in a spatial environment, in a metaversity or a K-12 metaverse environment, students can learn by doing. So, but you have to start with those 3D objects. So we've created or acquired almost 6,000 3D objects. So these include human organs, animal organs, molecules, but objects from history. So Harriet Tubman's gun, her pistol that she carried with her, has been recreated. And Amistad's slave ship is a large 3D asset, but students can now tour Amistad's slave ship. The Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, the courtroom, thinking about literature, the courtroom from To Kill a Mockingbird has been completely recreated. So a teacher can teach about the book, and maybe set the students in the chairs, or in the pews on the ground, or put them up in the balcony, or put them in the jury box, or even put one student in as the judge, and imagine learning that way. So a lot of times people think in terms of VR being very science-based, but to us, it's history, it's art, it's literature, it's all of those things. And because of that, we have to create a lot of 3D objects, and we have to animate some of them. So when we launch our chemistry lab in January, it will include chemistry experiments, including some experiments that aren't done in classrooms anymore because they're too dangerous, but they can do them in our classrooms. That's the beauty of it. So you start with those 3D objects. The second category are the learning spaces. So we have about 50 learning spaces, and they include traditional spaces like a science lab, an auditorium, but more interesting learning spaces like Dinosaur Island. If you're going to learn paleontology, why not learn on Dinosaur Island? Or if you're going to learn astronomy, why don't you start out in the planetarium, then hop into our transporter and beam up to the starship and learn about astronomy that way? Or if you're going to learn about art history, why not learn in an art museum with the world's greatest artwork right there in front of you? So the second piece are the learning spaces. The third piece are the 360 VR field trips. And we have field trips from all around the world. We have field trips on the Great Wall of China, volcanoes in Iceland, the redwoods in California, a dairy farm in Iowa, and on all over the world we travel. And for history, we've got the D-Day invasion. The 360 VR field trip starts on the English side of the channel. Then we head over to the French side of the English channel. Then we take the students into a German pillbox, and then we show them how they had breached those hills to pass the machine guns and such. And learning that way, learning history like that, it's remarkable. We take students to a remarkable highway that was built in the middle of stone in South Africa, some of the best highway engineering in the world. So that's the third piece, or the 360 VR field trips. And then finally, we have an entire library of recorded content. So if a university sets up their own metaversity, we set up for them their own library of content. So every class that's taught gets recorded and saved in full spatial 3D. We have our own library, which is, we have 100 different classes in science and art and math and engineering and on that teachers can access with some of the finest teachers in the world. So if you're teaching a class, maybe you're a homeschool parent, maybe you're a professor, you can access these classes that have already been taught perhaps on comparative anatomy. And then you launch it, everything's going on, the teacher's teaching, you have all these objects, pause it, add in your own thoughts on that, start it again. But it's not like watching a 2D video. People always say, oh, so, you show them a video. No, it's full spatial 3D. You get to walk around the objects. You get to walk inside the objects and then pull down and manipulate your own objects or experiments. So that's the fourth piece of the puzzle. And so, we provide 50 classrooms, approaching 6,000 3D objects. These are very complex objects, field trips from around the world, and of course, actual classes of recorded content.
Man, that is amazing. Just the wealth of just resources that you provide, and more than anything, experiences. So that's something that I love. And it's kind of funny because this is a nice segue to another clip. I have another clip here. Dr. Morris, the very first time I got to interview her just on her own. And this clip right here also kind of resonates a little bit with what you're saying. And we'll kind of just take the conversation there. So I want to add this clip here. So let's go ahead and check this one out.
Higher ed is catching up because there's also been more professional development of professors where they're seeing themselves more as educators and not just subject matter experts, because students are coming in, they can get the information off like I said, Google it, but are you going to teach me a different approach to retaining this information? That's what the VR is about, right? How can I engage and retain this information differently, where it becomes a part of who I am versus just something I did in order to obtain it? We have subject matter expert right here at our fingertips. So we don't necessarily need to be in a university setting always to get the knowledge. But what professors do offer is, like I said, that steady, consistent history of what success looks like over time, and what success looked like in this student, this decade, and over time have built a picture of what success looks like and what those students had that other students need. And teaching students how to get there is more important than being the one that knows everything.
So to me, that was a very powerful clip, and it kind of just really ties into what you were saying. For me, it's just the learning experience. What are you going to do with that information? How do you retain that information? And you mentioned something that I have always been just in constant sharing with teachers, saying, we have multimodal learners. We have all sorts of learners that are the kinesthetic, auditory, visual, all of that. They using all their senses, making all those connections, being able to, like you said, walk around an artifact is something that is very important. And myself, introducing some of my students and, with the Merge Cube, something like that, where there's an artifact that you can hold, that you can kind of manipulate here in the K-12 space. 1 year they sent me in to go do some tutoring, since my background is in math and science, social studies, but I went and did some science work with some students and preparing them for the state exam. And instead of just, okay, guys, let's go ahead and just review with video or review with handouts, I brought out the Merge Cubes. I said, okay, we're going to go ahead and do, the life cycle. And it was just amazing just to see the students' eyes light up when they have something tangible. They're able to walk around that experience. They're seeing it, they're hearing it. And to me, what you are offering is that experience where the student gets to have a little bit of control over their learning. They can create, obviously, as well. But that retention piece, and now, like Dr. Morris says, that information, that knowledge becomes part of them. It's not necessarily just a fact that you remember just so you can pass your fifth grade state exam and then you can forget all about it the next year because you don't need it. But now it's part of them that they can kind of take it with them. And I think that's one of the things that I love, that as you described, the different layers that Victory XR offers. And that's something that is so important, even more so now in the K-12 space, that I know we rely heavily on state exams, state testing, and of course you got to do their curriculum and you got to push through to prepare students for 3 hours of their life that do not define who they are. But why can't we integrate more of this? So my question to you, Steve, is what are some of the barriers of entry that you have seen, or that you're working to overcome to get into, let's say, the K-12 space?
Yeah, the number one barrier to entry is just simply understanding. So, if you think about any new technology, I was watching a clip of David Letterman interviewing Bill Gates about the internet. And he said, well, I heard recently that you can now listen to a baseball game over the internet. And this is like in 1995, I think. And Bill Gates said, yeah, that's something you can do now. And Letterman goes, well, have you heard of radio? And so it was this moment where you realize that understanding is more important, is the single most important piece to adoption. And, when Apple really first rolled out the smartphone with apps, a lot of people said, wow, I don't know why I need to upgrade to that, spend the extra money. I got a flip phone that works just fine. I can call people. And later people come to this understanding that, well, the device is much more than being able to flip it up and call somebody. So it's really, once there's plenty of money in schools, plenty of money in colleges and universities, 90% of the time people refer to cost as a barrier to entry. And there's this much truth to that. But what you find in this world, especially in the United States, is that once people understand the value of something, that school board or that college president, they can find the money, especially since this is not an overwhelming amount of money. So that's our single biggest barrier, is explaining to people the value and the value add to both the institution, the teacher, and the student once they adopt this style of learning. So to me, that's everything. And that's why shows like this and the Medium column I write and any way that I can get the message out is extremely important.
Yeah, and most definitely. And I agree with you on that 100%. I think, like you said, it's just understanding and getting that knowledge, seeing things differently. I think for me, my hardest battle that I have seen, and like I said, I just come in with a different mindset. And sometimes I feel like, man, I'm kind of like maybe I stand out a little bit more. But sometimes thinking, and I mentioned to you earlier, is we give a lot of respect to the past as far as how we teach, and we pay very little attention to what is coming in the future, and we become a little bit more reactive than proactive. And sometimes, like I said, we teach the way that we were taught. And recently I had a friend of mine, Ryan Scott, who was on the show, and he goes, if we teach students the way that we were taught, we're doing a disservice to them, because we need to be teaching them the way they need to learn now to prepare them. And just being able to see now that higher ed, and you've got institutions like Morehouse doing some amazing things, taking things to the next level. Not only it's not a gimmick, it really isn't. As from I've kept in contact with Dr. Morris, and this is not like a wow factor thing, but the students are actually really immersed in their learning and their creation, and they're excited, and it's like, wow, like they're taking it to that next level. And I think K-12, we really could do a little bit better at doing this? I know it seems overwhelming, but like you said, as long as we get that information out there and you can see that value add, that can definitely make a big difference in changing that viewpoint and that fear more than anything. I think a lot of it is just the fear of the new, like, well, what's my role in this going to be, or how is my role going to change? Is this going to be more work? But like I said, I'm just really excited for companies like yourself and the work that you're doing. So hopefully, like I said, we can definitely get some more K-12 institutions on board and, experimenting what the future of education will look like and the future of work will look like.
Well, and let's talk about American high school, what they're doing, because if you look at what Dana Williams has done, and again, it's a female leader in tech. She was a computer science major when there were basically no Black women in computer science classes in the United States, and she was a pioneer from the technology standpoint. Then she started in the early 2000s an online school before online schools were a thing. And now she has 3,000 students, but there's a lot of online schools today. And so she decided last year that she was going to transition her class to her school, at least some of the classes, to these virtual reality synchronous classes. And so now students will sign up for those, and globally from around the world, they will come into the same class together and learn. And if you haven't had Dana on yet, you ought to have her on, because what she's doing is groundbreaking. And so suddenly students from the Bahamas and from Europe and from the United States gather in a classroom together. They break into small groups in class, and they conduct experiments while the teacher walks around the class looking at what they're doing. And these are high school students. What a great gift to be able to attend a school that's globally available with global students. I mean, it's a wonderful thing.
No, it certainly is. And like I said, right now what you mentioned is just the possibilities are endless in that sense of getting students from all over the world to come to one place to learn together, and you're seeing things from different perspectives, and it's that connecting with others. It may not be in real life, but you're still connecting with others. You're learning in this created learning space, and right now that's what we're seeing a lot of. I mean, it comes up often in ads and everything on all social media platforms, and you're seeing these working spaces. You're seeing where people are creating these offices and office settings where people are meeting. They're working, they're being productive, except they're just doing it in AR VR, but it doesn't take anything away from the work that they're doing. I mean, they log in remotely, they're still doing what they need to do. The same thing, I can see that in our school setting. And like you said, I think that's such a wonderful experience that those students will take with them. Not only like, hey, I got to use a headset, but the learning that took place to say, hey, I got to meet somebody from the Bahamas. I got to meet somebody from this other country, and I got to meet this. That experience is something that it definitely will pay off in dividends, return on investment, because you have a wider lens of the way things are around the world. And I think that's beautiful. All right. So, Steve, let's talk a little bit more about your company and the work that you're doing, because I'm kind of curious, as now that this has taken off, and you said you're going to be doing the universities also as well, where, and maybe, I don't know, I'm just going to ask you, where is it that you see this going in the next 5 years?
Yeah. So I think what you're going to see is sort of what we call this hockey stick curve, where right now we're sort of on the bottom of that hockey stick, but we're approaching the part of that hockey stick that starts to really accelerate. And our plan is to launch 10 metaversities in 2022 that are launching classes in February of this year. And then you'll see other universities and colleges probably starting with the remote learners. Like, you've got a lot of schools that have 100,000 remote students. Well, they've got to start offering their labs in a better way than through this 2D screen that you and I are communicating through right now. So you're going to see pretty rapid adoption, either fully as a metaversity, or secondarily just with some labs at the college and university level. At the K-12 level, you're going to start seeing a shift in charter schools and in online schools to these metaverse classrooms. And that'll start leading the way. For the local geographically stationary schools, you'll see them bringing in more what we might call VR in a box, where they'll have a set that can roll into a classroom. Students put on the headset and they can suddenly be in China 5 minutes later as a group class taking a field trip together. So these are things that we will see I think that's how it rolls out. But you know what you're also going to see is there are millions of homeschool students in the United States. And those students will begin gathering together as well in groups. And we're already seeing that take off with homeschool students. So, especially, if you're teaching maybe an advanced science in high school and it's not your strong point as a parent, this is a way where you can have Wendy Martin, National Finalist Teacher of the Year, teach your student anatomy, your child anatomy. And that's a great solution there. So that's sort of how I see it rolling out. I think 5 years from now, we'll sit on this show again, and we'll also see a lot of augmented reality. That's a part of that as well. Our hope is to roll out an augmented reality conservation area with a rainforest and endangered species for students to walk around in their gym or on their playground or in their football field and walk around and pet the animals and to learn about the saber-toothed tiger and the dodo bird and those that are still with us today that are maybe close to extinction. And it's possible that, if I can get it pulled off, that we'll just build an entire island to visit, and maybe the one that Charles Darwin visited.
Wow.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
That's amazing. And what I love about this is that, maybe years ago that would seem something like that is so far-fetched. It's like, oh yeah, that'll never happen. That's just only in the movies and it's just this. But just the fact that the way you're talking about this, like it's here. It's here. Everything that maybe in the past you said, oh, that'll never happen. It's here and it's happening. And my advice just to anybody, in any industry, is just really open up your eyes and see what's happening, because this right here is definitely, like you said, something that's going to take off. And I am excited as an educator, as an edupreneur, as all of those. As a doctoral student, I'm excited because these are the things that I'm passionate about. The change, how is the education landscape can change, and maybe even for the better. Will it be perfect? Not right off the bat. Will there be obstacles and barriers? Yeah, there'll be obstacles and barriers, as in with anything. But this is something that is here. It's here to stay, and it's going to continue to grow. And I'm just excited because I get to be part of this space, and that's really what excites me the most, to be part of something big that, for myself, it's going to shake up education, and it's currently doing so, as we see, with Dana Williams and Dr. Morris, and you've got the Stanfords, and you've got other universities that are going to be coming up, and then through the work that you're doing. And I just love everything that you already have in mind, that is, that you've already envisioned, and all the steps. And this sounds so exciting, and it's very novel. It's very fresh. And I'm just really excited for what VictoryXR is doing. So, Steve, as we wind down our show, I want to ask you just a couple of questions, maybe one more serious question, and then kind of do like 3 little wind down questions, just to, just to end on a happy note. Not that the show hasn't been happy, because I've been excited about everything you're saying. But right now, currently, what are some things that you may be seeing in your industry that might be counterproductive, that in AR VR, maybe counterproductive for just the AR VR industry, or maybe counterproductive for being able to get AR VR into the K through 12 higher ed space?
Yeah, one of the challenges that we have had over the last year is that because of the pandemic, schools have just been trying to figure out, what is this Zoom thing? How do we make it work? And so, even though people realized we needed more remote learning during that time period, um, just trying to figure out Zoom consumed the IT departments of school districts. And so a lot of the VR metaverse stuff was put on hold during that time period. Today, I see too many people in the XR industry quibbling about, oh, do we know what a metaverse is? Does it really exist yet? Blah, blah, blah. Who cares? The bottom line is we have students existing in virtual reality worlds in a synchronous group way, learning with their professors. And what we have today is an amazingly wonderful experience and way to learn that has never been possible in the history of humankind. And so, why argue or quibble about this or that when suddenly, we have been given an amazing gift, an amazing way to learn. And so, there are always the negative Nellies out there that just want to argue or find out, you say, hey, we can do this. And they're always the first to say, well, but you know what? You can't do this. So, well, okay, fine. We can't do everything yet, but we can get a long way there. So that's the other thing that I think, just the mindset to embrace the amazing place that we've reached. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you, and oftentimes as I go on LinkedIn and I, visit my social media and following, what's happening with Web 3.0, what's happening with NFTs, what's happening with all of this, you do get a lot of that. Like you mentioned, it's like, well, this is, who is it really here? When will we see it? Or no, this is something that we've already done. So, there's a lot of back and forth. But I think, I can, as you were describing, your thought process, I was like, that's very similar to the way I am. I mean, hey, I'm just going to continue moving forward, whether it's here or not, whether you think the metaverse is, here or not, or it's active or you can't do this. You just got to move forward, and that's it. And you just kind of see where things are going. But again, the fact that you already are focused on what you want to bring in to this space and currently what you are offering, I mean, that right there, like you mentioned, is something that was, maybe just an idea several years ago, and now it's coming to fruition. And that's what's really exciting about it. So, yeah, there's always going to be those detractors, those haters, but, you just got to move forward. And I appreciate your work in continuing to move forward and moving the industry forward and, the education space forward. So that's wonderful. All right, Steve. So now as we wind down, we got 3 last questions for you. And my question to you, number one, and again, it might catch you off guard, but if you could turn one of your hobbies into a profession, which one would it be?
Basketball. I play basketball once or twice a week. I would love to dunk, and I would love to play professionally. Probably not going to happen.
Hey, but you never know. It's all good. I love that though. So if you can turn that into a profession, it would be basketball, it'd be dunking and shooting some threes. That's wonderful. All
I do
right.
hit the threes,
There you go. That's good.
but
All
it's an
right.
elementary school gym. So there's that.
All right. Next question for you, my friend, is if you can have a billboard with anything on it, anything, what would it be and why?
Love your neighbor. That's it. And why? There's just, you know what? There's just so much unnecessary vile. I never realized how mean people were until they got to hide behind the anonymity of the internet. And I just, I just wish people could be more friendly, loving, optimistic, and embrace the goodness of people. There's a lot of problems, there's a lot of challenges, but you know what? The world keeps getting better, and I'm the eternal optimist, and I love people.
Love it. I couldn't have thought of something better. I love what you said, spoken from the heart. Definitely something that I agree with. And Thank you for sharing that and being open about that. Definitely love thy neighbor. All right, Steve, last question. If this was your show and you were interviewing me, what would be one question you'd like to ask me?
What drives you to get out of bed every day and pursue what you love?
Oh man, it's just my passion. Somebody had asked me, why I do this, what I do, but it's just the love and the passion for my craft. My craft as an educator, well, number one, my craft as a husband, as a provider, but my passion that I have for education and my continual pursuit of learning and being able to connect not only with other people, but be a connector as well. And so that is what really excites me about what I do. I wake up every morning saying, okay, who am I going to connect with? Who am I going to learn from today? What am I going to learn? And how can I share it? Or how can I sprinkle that little knowledge nugget that I learned and sprinkle it into my current practice to make myself better? So that right there is the drive that I have each and every day. Like you see me right now, like this is me when I get to connect with amazing people such as yourself and be able to share this knowledge with others that currently right now might want to get into this space or have their doubts, but now they get to see this show and say, hey, you know what, let me dabble in this, let me learn a little bit more about this. So really that's what drives me.
Well, I love it. And the world is a better place because you take the time to do this show, and it'll be a better place in the future. So, thanks for having me on.
Oh no, the pleasure is all mine, Steve. Like I said, I've been a longtime follower. I see your work, I read your work, and it's just been great to just connect with you. And to me also is just the how genuine, authentic, just how friendly you are, because oftentimes, we see people on these spaces and I'm like, wow, I would love to just pick their brain for a bit. And sometimes you get replies, sometimes you don't. But the fact that you replied right away to one of my messages and now we have you on the show, I am very grateful and thankful for that. And of course, as you know, I am going to pick your brain and VictoryXR's brain in the next couple of years as I'm working on dissertation. But I just love that I've been able to make that connection with you and Dr. Morris also, who has been very active in the chat. And I'm just so thankful for Dr. Morris and her ultimate team also at Morehouse. So please make sure that you check out Morehouse in the metaverse. I will put that link in the show notes as well, so you can watch that video. Very powerful. And of course, don't forget to check out VictoryXR.com. All of this will be in the show notes, and the same way that you'll be able to contact Mr. Steve Grubbs himself as well will all be on the show notes. So Steve, again, thank you so much. It is my pleasure having you and being able to interview you, and I'm excited to see what VictoryXR will do just in the next, I'm going to say in the next 2 years, because I think this is something that's going to blow up really quick, and you guys are going to do some amazing work. And as always, I definitely love to have you back on as your body of work continues to just follow up and see where we're at right after this conversation.
Final comment before I exit here.
Yes, sir.
Exit stage right. If your listeners don't know Dr. Musina Morris yet from Morehouse College, that's pretty good alliteration too. Get to know her because get to know her now, because you're going to see her on the cover of Wired magazine one of these days.
Yes.
Little advice. Okay.
Yes. No,
Thanks,
I believe it. I believe it for sure. All right, guys. So thank you so much for joining me on this very special episode here on Tuesday afternoon. Again, as always, it's not our usual Wednesday evening or Saturday morning show, but when the stars line up and your guests, you can get your guests in, you make sure and you take advantage of that. So thank you all for joining us this lovely afternoon. Dr. Morris and your team, big shout out to you all. I'm thankful for the clips that I was able to share. Continue doing the amazing work. And as always, my friends, like I always tell you, don't forget, stay techie, my friends.